Hello students, welcome again. In our previous video lecture, we discussed post-structuralism as a literary theory. But in today's video lecture, we are going to understand new historicism as the late 20th century critical theory or a literary movement. Students, new historicism is a theory which we find towards the end of the 20th century in 1980s. It was in fact a reaction against the previous theories like post-structuralism, like formalism and new criticism. If you examine the 20th century critical theories of new criticism, then you find that the basic focus while analyzing the text, while interpreting the work of art, is the text only. The 20th century critics, they focused mainly on the interpretation of the text and not the author. Okay, but new historicism was a reaction against this formalism, this formalist approach to literature, and they gave much emphasis on the study of the text in relation to the historical and cultural context. They believe that no text can exist without historical and cultural background. Literature, according to new historicism, is indirectly connected with the time in which it is produced, the author who has written this literature, and the history or the historical events which took place during the time when this particular work of art was written. So, in short, you can say that here in new historicism, historicity of the text and textuality of the history, they are interpreted and examined while interpreting a work of art. They believe that a text has a connection with history. So there is historicity in the text, and they believe in the textuality of the history. So the text, that means literature, influences history and history influences the text. So in short, there is a connection between history, between historical and cultural and social background of the author and the text written by the author. Now let's have a look at the origin of new historicism. Remember this name when somebody asks you who is the founding father of new historicism, then the name is Stephen Greenblatt. Stephen was an American critic. He has been considered as the founder of this new approach of criticizing a work of art. He coined the term new criticism in his very popular publication. The title of that publication is Introduction to the Powers and Forms in the English Renaissance in 1982. Remember this date, 1982 is actually the beginning of new historicism in the hands of Stephen Greenblatt. J.W. Leywa, another historian, another new follower of historicism, also published his critical work, The Tragedy State, the study in Jacobean drama, and he popularized the idea that text is not everything. Okay, he believed that the critics must also look outside the text. Okay, they must look at the history of the text, historicity of the text, and then you get the fuller understanding of that work of art. And this theory, New Historicism, gained much popularity after 1980s and 1990s. Even in today's times, in the beginning of the 21st century, there are hundreds of critics who are following this theory of New Historicism. Now, before we dive deeper to understand this theory, first of all, let's define this term New Historicism. As you can see on the screen, the definition is that New Historicism means it is a method, okay? It is a method of analyzing a work of art. And this method is based on the parallel reading of literary and non-literary texts, okay? See, literature, there are different types of literatures written by different authors. Some works are literary works, some other works are non-literary works. Which are the non-literary works? Say, for example, newspapers, they are literature, but they are non-literary works. Magazines, they are non-literary works. So these new historicists, they believe that there must be a parallel study of the literary and non-literary works usually written during the same historical period. So that means he wants to say, this definition wants to say that if you want to examine a work of art written by, say, for example, Mahatma Gandhi, My Experiments with Truth, written by Mahatma Gandhi, then you need to examine what kind of non-literary works were published during the time when this text, My Experiments with Truth by Mahatma Gandhi, was published, so that you can get a better and broader idea about that text. Another definition is given by Louis Montrose. He says that it is a combined interest in the textuality of history and historicity of the text. So, Louis believes that there is a connection between history and the text. There is history within the text and there is text within the history. Both are influencing each other. So, in short, we can understand New Historicism as the latest approach towards the end of the 20th century. This is the approach of criticism, okay, and it is based on the idea that literary work should be considered as the product of the time in which it is written, the place where it is published, and the historical circumstances in which it is written. A work of art, according to New Historicism, is not in vacuum. It is not an isolated work of art. In fact, this movement is a reaction against all the 20th century movements of criticism like formalism, structuralism, and post-structuralism. The followers of New Historicism, they try to understand a work of art through historical as well as cultural context. Okay, they further try to understand cultural history of the particular nation, particular country in which it is written or produced. Now, friends, you must be wondering, why is it known New Historicism? If there is New Historicism, that means there must be a term Old Historicism. So to understand New Historicism, we need to understand what this Old Historicism is. Just like जैसे दिन के बारे में अगर पता करना है तो रात का ज्ञान भी हमें होना चाहिए. जैसे प्रकाश को समझना है तो अंधकार भी समझना चाहिए. In order to understand New Historicism, you need to understand Old Historicism. Let me take you back to the 19th century. Now, New Historicism was towards the end of the 20th century, but I am taking you back 200 years. Okay, Now if you go back to the 19th century, there were some critics who believed in this theory that literature and history there is a connection, and one among them was Saint-Beuve. Okay, he was a 19th century French critic who came with his theory of biographical and historical study of literature. He believed that if you want to analyze a work of art, you need to study the biography of the author, you need to study the historical background of the author. Okay, he believed that no writer, no author lives in vacuum. All arts spring from the personality of the author. Okay, when the author writes literature, it comes from the mind and personality of the author, and mind and personality of the author is actually the result of the time period in which he is living. So you cannot detach yourself from the society, from your history, from your tradition. So Saint-Beuve already said this thing during the 19th century. Another critic was Hippolyte Taine. Hippolyte Taine was also a French critic during the same 19th century, and he gave the theory of race, milieu and moment. He believed that literature is the product of these three: race means the tradition, milieu means the social environment, and the moment means time, the time period during which the work of art is published. Okay, Taine believed that you cannot detach the work of art from the time period, from the social surrounding, and also from the tradition in which the author is living. So he was also an old historicist. He was also a critic who believed in this old historicism. In the same manner, there is another critic during the 20th century, E.M.W. Tillyard. Tillyard was also an old historicist who published his critical work Elizabethan World Picture, published in 1943, and Shakespeare's historical plays in 1944. And there, Tillyard has examined the different plays of William Shakespeare in the light of the historical events which took place in Europe during the times of William Shakespeare and also before the times of William Shakespeare, and he has tried to relate these historical events with the literature, with the plays written by William Shakespeare. Michel Foucault was also, you can put Foucault in this category. He gave the concept of epistemology, okay, which means knowledge. According to him, knowledge or truth is what? Okay, truth is derived from the history, from tradition, from culture, right? So the truth which is presented in literature is actually the result of the history, of the tradition in which it is written. So these were some guys like Saint-Beuve, Hippolyte Taine, Tillyard, Michel Foucault. You can put them in the category of old historicists, right? Now let's come to the new criticism. Now, this is 19th century old historicism, but there was a reaction against this old historicism, and that reaction was new criticism. In the first half of the 20th century, there were some critics like T.S. Eliot who gave objective approach to literature. They believed that literature and the author, they are different. Literature or the work of art has nothing to do with the time period in which it is written. They believed that the critic must examine a work of art in an objective manner, in a scientific manner. And that's why if you examine the definition of poetry given by T.S. Eliot, that poetry is not a turning loose of emotions. It is an escape from emotions. It is an escape from the poet's personality. Here, he is advocating the objective approach. He breaks all the connections between the text and the author, between the text and the history and the society. In the same manner, there was another critic, I.A. Richards, in the first half of the 20th century, who published the Principles of Literary Criticism in 1924, and he also argued that text should be very closely analyzed without referring to the other external context or materials like cultural context, political context, economic context, and all other contexts must be ignored while analyzing a work of art. Roland Barthes, another modern critic, he gives one step ahead. He goes one step ahead. He was a French critic, and he says that there is no existence of the author. He said that the author is dead. He published the death of the author in 1967, and he advocated that the focus on the form and structure is more important. Author is not at all important while analyzing a work of art. So these were the new critics who rejected the old historicism. But there were some critics who reacted against this formalistic approach of T.S. Eliot, I.A. Richards, and Roland Barthes. And that new approach is termed as New Historicism. Okay, this New Historicism believes that there is a close relationship between the literature and the history. The critics of this New Historicism believe that authors are not living alone in the society. They are the products of their culture, of their national history, and as a result, literature also has deep impact, influence of that culture, of that history during which it is written. They believe that a work of art cannot be understood well without considering its historical as well as cultural background. They believe that history and culture of a particular nation influences its literature, and literature in turn influences its history and culture. So both are influencing each other. Okay, using Michael Foucault's work as a starting point, New Historicism aims at interpreting a literary text as an expression of a reaction to the power structures of the surrounding society. If you read post-structuralism, they give much emphasis on, if you read structuralism, they give much emphasis on the study of language. They believe that meaning comes out from language, but post-structuralism goes one step ahead and they say no, meaning does not come only from language. You need to consider other outside sources also to derive at the meaning. So from that point onwards, that is the starting point of a new historicism, and they believe that meaning of the text must also come from the social, cultural, and historical background of the author. Now the text and the co-text. New historicism believe in the concept of co-text. What is this co-text? They focus on the study of literary and non-literary text in a parallel manner, as I said in the beginning of this lecture. They try to relate the text to a non-literary text, to some newspapers, magazines, and other non-literary works. Okay, so these non-literary texts, according to New Historicism, they are known as co-text. So if you want to examine a text, you connect it with co-text of the same period. They firmly believe that even non-literary texts of history, philosophy, religion, mass communication, sociology, and so many other fields, they exercise deep influence on literary works, and literary works exercise deep influence on other core texts, that means non-literary works of philosophy, history, religion, and mass communication. So this is what they believe, that you cannot detach literature from the society, from the history. So in short, we can say that new historicism was a movement which was in continuation of the 19th century theory, which was earlier developed by Taine and Sainte-Beuve, and it was a reaction against the formalistic approach of the 20th century. Okay, the critics of new historicism, they study the text considering these following points. Which points do they study? The time in which it is written, the person who has written the text, even the historical events which took place during the time when it was published, how literature has evolved with the time to form to the form in which it is present today, and what message does it carry to the audience. All these things are combinedly studied together by the new historicist critiques. So friends, here we come to the end of this lecture. I hope this lecture is helpful to you, and please share this video among your friends and classmates. Thank you very much for watching. God bless you.